Welcome back to the channel. Gonna drink some coffee today. We're gonna talk about the 6.5 284, 6.5 PRC, Hornady, and a bunch of other cool stuff. Stay tuned. Alright, so I just watched a Hornady podcast that came out a few days ago on the 6.5 284 Norma. Now I'm sure all of you watch that podcast that watch my channel. But if you haven't, I do recommend it. It's a really good podcast. Definitely like the guys on there. And they have some very interesting episodes. And occasionally they do cartridge episodes, kind of like what I've done in the past, about a specific cartridge. Usually their own, but sometimes they'll do one on the 308 or the 30-06 or the 6.5 284, which is what they did this time. And they really came out and just said that the 6.5 284 Norma was a big inspiration for them when creating some of their cartridges, specifically the 6.5 PRC. And so I just wanted to talk about that today. One, because it and the 30-06 are my two favorite cartridges of all time. They kind of go back and forth. I don't think you can quite see it, but there's a 6.5 PRC down here that will be on the channel very soon. That's been sent to me, and so I'm looking forward to shooting that. And also, just it's interesting to talk about the cartridge design and how that Hornady, kind of patterned some of their 6.5s off the 6.5 284 Norma. Now, the 6.5 Creedmoor was Sammy-spec'd and standardized, I believe, back in 2007. The 6.5 PRC, I believe, was 2016. If I got that wrong, you can correct me. And the 6.5 284 Norma was 1999. And in the video, they correctly talked about it coming from the 284 Winchester, and they kind of gave the history of it being a Wildcat for a long time. And then Norma standardized it in 1999. Now, if you go back on a podcast they did probably a year ago, they talked about the 6.5 284 with its 35-degree shoulder angle. And they mentioned when they were thinking about doing the 6.5 Creedmoor and then later the 6.5 PRC, at first they wanted to do a 35-degree shoulder angle, but they found it easier and more consistent with the way you have to get your tooling set up and all that stuff at the factory to do a 30-degree shoulder angle. And then in this podcast, they talked about the rebated rim, which the 6.5 284 has, and how it actually takes an extra step, an extra process in the brass developing stage. And so once again, they chose to not go with the rebated rim. But that's two examples of where they liked the 6.5 284's design. They just felt like they could maybe save a step here or there, maybe do it a little bit easier and not quite to go to the lengths of the design of the 6.5 284. So I found that very interesting. Now, I did a video a year and a half ago probably where I talked about how I feel like Hornady got a lot of their design cues in 2007 from that Creedmoor cartridge, which of course is neck down 30TC, from the 6.5 284 in 1999. Now, David Emery and those guys that worked at Hornady, I think, did a fantastic job and developed a cool cartridge, and it was developed for long-range target shooting. It ended up being pretty popular for, hunting as well. But I definitely think they were looking at that 6.5 284 when they come up with that design. But in this podcast, Hornady is very specific that they definitely were looking at the 6.5 284 when developing the 6.5 PRC. And this episode had two purposes. One is to just talk about the 6.5 284 and kind of give their personal experiences with them, whether they've shot them in competition, they built a custom gun, reloaded for them, whatever the case. And then to explain how they took the concepts and the performance, more specifically, of the 6.5 284 and developed what they considered a little bit more superior factory loading with the 6.5 PRC. So I've got my old Mauser here. This is a custom sporterized Mauser, 26-inch barrel, chambered in 6.5 284. Got a Meopta scope on it. And you know, I've really enjoyed reloading for it. I haven't had a ton of brass. I bought 100 Lapua brass years ago, and that's all I've used this entire time. And I've actually got all them loaded currently, so I'm gonna have to either get some more brass or something to load more in the future. I would say the highlight of my reloading so far was with a 140 grain bullet, in particular the Spear Impact, using MagPro powder. I got 3160 feet per second. That's without pressure. It is a 26-inch barrel, so that's going to add a little bit of velocity. But when I did the video on how this beats the 6.5 PRC, I was, you know, basing it off of YouTube videos I've watched from other people. Some of it shooting factory, but also some shooting hand loads. And 3160 with a 140 grain bullet seemed incredibly good to me, and was definitely beating, you know, what was out there that I saw of 6.5 PRC. Now stay tuned on the channel, because I'm going to try to do something very similar with a 6.5 PRC and other things, and so we can do a better comparison later on. But I'm a huge fan of the 284 Winchester. I've talked about it multiple times on the channel, and I love the 6.5 284. At one time it had the tightest group at 1,000 yards. When people like Eric Cortina first got into long-range target shooting, the first cartridges he ever used was the 6.5 284. I don't think it really worked out good for him, and he moved on to the 284 Shihane and different things, and now the 7 PRCW. But like Hornady talked about in their podcast, it was a dynamite long-range target shooting cartridge in F-class and bench rest and other things as well. If you want to see a cool video, it's by Gunworks, and it's one of their custom 6.5 284s, which I don't think they make anymore. They took it to Africa, and you know, all their shots were around 350 to about 500 yards. All one-shot kills. Every animal just dropped in their tracks. That was a pretty cool video. But whether it's the rebated rim, whether it is the 35-degree shoulder angle, whether it's that really the first short mag, that's what I would call the 284 Winchester. The 6.5 284, combined with its long-range target shooting records it once held, is just a really cool cartridge. And it was nice to hear Hornady give praise to it and basically say, yeah, we loved the performance that the 6.5 284 gave. The host, Seth, talked about he was extremely close to building a custom gun in the 6.5 284 multiple times. And then they kind of shift the topic to the 6.5 PRC. And I think their points were actually pretty good. And despite me being a very biased fan of the 6.5 284, I do agree with most of what they said. The original Sammy offering was 1 in 9. You're not going to find that today. Certain manufacturers like Savage still sell 6.5 284s, and they're all 1 in 8. But yes, when it first came out, it was 1 in 9. And the 284 was originally designed as a short action, but it's a pretty long case, and it's really tough to, you know, shoot anything other than a light bullet with that long case. Things like the WSMs and the Psalms and the 6.5 PRC or the 6.8 Western, those type of cartridges are just a little fatter and a little bit shorter, and so they're probably better designed for a short action. Now this is a Mauser 98. It's a kind of an intermediate length action, perfect for that 284 Winchester. But most rifles today are either long or short action. Now if you get the Savage Storm or something like that in a 6.5 284, it does come in a long action, so it's perfect. But a lot of your factory ammo will adhere to that shorter cartridge overall length and the max pressure that's actually based on the 284 Winchester, I do believe. And once again, that was because the 284 Winchester was meant to be a short action, and I didn't say it earlier, but it was meant to be in semi-automatic rifles like the Winchester 100 and lever action rifles like the Model 88. And I said it 1,000 times on the channel, I don't need to go into it again. Had it been put in the Model 70 in a long action, it would have been the bee's knees as far as I'm concerned. So if you want to build a custom rifle like what I've got here, or you want to get something like a Savage, you know, 110 Storm in that long action 1-in-8 twist, that's a really cool cartridge. And it's a cool rifle that meets that cartridge perfectly. The 6.5 PRC, because it has a shorter case, does just barely fit into a short action. I mean, we're talking like 2.950 inches. Barely fits in the magazine, but technically it is a short action, and you can still seat the bullet out pretty far, unlike the 6.5 284. And even though all 6.5 284s today are in 1-in-8 twist, the 6.5 PRC has been in 1-in-8 twist since the very beginning. And so Hornady feels like going with a 30-degree shoulder angle, going without the rebated rim, makes the process of developing and producing the brass a little easier. And then, of course, they have that head height that they want, sticking the bullet out further, that faster twist rate. So they feel like they've kind of improved the 6.5 284. And I can understand that, but I feel like I just personally prefer the uniqueness of that 6.5 284. But it was really cool to hear Hornady talk about this cartridge. I didn't expect that. I really didn't. They have talked about the 243, the 708, the 308, the 30-06, the 270. Some very common cartridges. I think the 300 Win Mag. But I was shocked to see them talk about the 6.5 284. But the reason is because it was such an influence on the cartridges that they've come out with in 6.5 caliber. And so as soon as I saw that, I knew I wanted to talk about it because I love the 6.5 284. Now, I will admit one huge advantage of the 6.5 PRC versus the 6.5 284 is the factory availability, for sure. Good luck finding hardly any rifles chambered in 6.5 284. I did mention one, and there's a few more, but lots of rifles are chambered in 6.5 PRC. And yes, your factory ammo, one is there's a lot more options with the 6.5 PRC, but it does, you know, have that higher pressure rating of 65,000, and it has some of those modern design cues already built in. So if you're not a reloader and you're not into building custom rifles, it's an easy pick. Definitely pick the 6.5 PRC. But if you like to reload and you like custom rifles, I just think the 6.5 284 is way cooler. Once again, factory ammo, factory options, gonna side with the 6.5 PRC. But what about reloading? Which one's better? The thing that Seth and the Hornady team liked so much about the 6.5 284 was the reloading potential. It's got so much potential when you reload it. It's so much better as a hand-loading cartridge than it is in factory ammo. And so it's going to be cool going forward to kind of test these things out. On nostalgia, on cool factor, on tradition, I love the 6.5 284. To me, it's way better. On just being more available, more common, and more modern, definitely 6.5 PRC would have an edge there. My guess is when you hand load for the 6.5 284 and the 6.5 PRC, you're going to basically have about identical performance. Generally speaking, with the same grain weight bullet, you're probably going to get very similar velocities, and everything is just going to be about the same. So performance-wise, it's real similar to like a 7 Mauser and a 708, just almost identical on the ballistic performance. One just has so much more prestige and is more nostalgic, and then one is just more modern. I think that's a very similar comparison here. I do know that a few of you have 6.5 284s. We've talked about them on other videos. Love to know what you think. Do you think it compares favorably when reloaded to the 6.5 PRC? You think it's better? Or would you just prefer the 6.5 PRC? Love to know which one you think is better. Obviously, one's more available. That's not even a question. One's more common, one's more available. But which one do you think is just better? Just throw your personal opinion in there. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. More content with the 6.5 284, but a lot more content with the 6.5 PRC coming up. Hit the notification bell to see those videos when they pop up. Hopefully you have a great day. Until next time, take care.